Hi, I'm Shelley, resident of Victoria, Australia, and someone who loves to travel. This presentation is part of my private project to see as much of my home state by public transport as possible now that it's so affordable, especially when compared to the price of petrol. This particular trip was to Albury, which is actually just across the border in New South Wales, but is still covered by the ticket price cap in Victoria. As always, I planned my journey on the Beeline page. Because we travelled on the grand final long weekend, we were travelling on weekend rates both days. So in total, $36 for transport there and back for the three of us. Here's something new that I learnt this trip. These are not our seats because I ended up having to call due to not realising this until partway through. If you can't see the seats you want when you're booking, try clicking on the arrows at the bottom or the top. Then it will show the next carriage if there is one. And as a result, we were able to sit together after all. So, as always, we crossed the Yarra just after sunrise on our way to walk to Southern Cross Station in Melbourne, and we caught our train from Southern Cross. Albury train station looks a little bit fancier than Southern Cross Station in Melbourne. And while there is a building with a big eye at the old station master's house, don't be fooled. It's just a map of Albury as the tourist information has moved into town. So my partner went to see his dad, who lives in Albury, while my son and I walked into the Visitor Information Centre at the Library Museum to get our bearings and also to check out the museum. The staff member we spoke to was so helpful, giving us tips for good places to see just by walking, and I'm so glad that we didn't miss the museum. Just on the way in is a display of historical signs, and there's also an explanation of the signs that the First Nations people left to let others know what animals could be caught in that area, etc. And that actually reminded me of our trip to Central Australia, where we saw those little kind of shopping list or catalogues on rock faces. Of the more recent signs, I was struck by the bullet ridden Pastures Protection Board sign from Tabletop. So apparently many signs in the area have copped unfriendly fire over the years. I thought the display at the front was the extent of the museum exhibits, but there was actually so much more. There was a display about the life of Dr. Sam Woods. There were other displays about all different inhabitants of Albury. People who arrived from Europe many years ago, travelling through the Bonegilla settlement. There was the Living Room Project, which I loved, about a family from the Democratic Republic of Congo who spent 10 years in Nairobi between being granted refugee status and finally being allowed to settle in Australia. And there was a wonderful display about how far many of the First Nations people in the area had come from and their unique experiences, including those of the stolen generation. We were planning to walk through from this museum to the art gallery, but before we got through the museum, my partner had rejoined us and his sister was in town ready to meet us for lunch at the Bended Elbow. So we enjoyed lovely food and company there. We had booked at the Paddle Steamer Motel purely because we could book using Flight Rewards, but it was actually a wonderful location right across from the Murray. And the room was clean and unexpectedly included a kitchenette, which helped us keep costs down further. They also have a small pool and the weather was hotter than we expected, so we were kicking ourselves for not packing bathers and we'll definitely do that next time. So yeah, this is just across the road from our motel. On Saturday morning, because of the heat, we set out fairly early for our only full day. The plan was lots of walking. We walked along the Murray to the Yinjiamera Sculpture Trail. An unexpected highlight was the flying fox colony. There seemed to be thousands of them. And if you have a look at this photo, they kind of look almost like seed pods, but every single one of those brown blobs is a flying fox, and that is by no means the full colony. The sculpture trail is not to be missed. These are just a few of the sculptures, and we spent several hours on this trail. I have done a separate slideshow of just the trail with all of the sculptures. After the sculpture trail, we walked into the Botanic Gardens where we had a picnic lunch. Then we cracked open the Historical Buildings Walk, of which the gardens constitute stop 7. We had picked up a paper map at the visitor information, but we also downloaded the app, which has narration as well as some old photos of each stop. Because we started at number 7 and it isn't exactly a loop, and we knew we would be back at the station on the Sunday, we did stops 7 to 13 and then stops 3 to 6, planning to pick up stops 1 and 2 the following day. We saw the Beehive buildings, the Globe Hotel, and the post office. Also, stop 10, which is the Albury Town Hall, houses the Murray Art Museum, Albury. So we took time out to go through that. It's mostly a contemporary art gallery. There were some very thought-provoking pieces on racism. This photo is next to text from the dictation texts that were a feature of the White Australia policy. Another exhibition I loved was by a woman who, growing up sort of in the 70s and 80s, used to, when she got to the end of a roll of film so that she could process it, she would use up the roll of film by taking a photo of her bedroom, and discovered, after a few years that she'd inadvertently documented how her room had looked as she grew up. Continuing on with the historical buildings walk, we got to appreciate the lush gardens and saw the conservatorium. We continued on with this historical buildings walk. There were so many places with lots of history. We had actually planned to be at the art gallery while the rest of the country were watching the AFL Grand Final, but we ended up getting through everything we wanted to do by about the time it was starting. So we ended up not actually making use of that quiet time, which is something I do try to do each year. We finished the day with fish and chips beside the river. The closest place we could find was the South Albury takeaway that would do fish and chips. It was a little bit of a hike back to the river, but our food was still hot. On Sunday morning, we headed to the market on Kiowa Street. It was kind of a bit trash and treasury, but they did have some yummy donuts. Then we spent some time exploring the Botanic Gardens more thoroughly. We revisited the visitor information and the library museum so Brennan could see the exhibits. Then headed down to finish off the historical building walk before going back to the station to go home. So in terms of information sources, in addition to the V-Line site, there are the various visitor information resources. I really do recommend stopping by the visitor information at the Library Museum in person though, because it's an amazing place to visit and the staff were really helpful. So there you have it, Victorian public transport, but to New South Wales this time. Thanks, have a great day.